Right now they are trying to convince the shareholders of Warner Brothers that they're going to be a better buyer than Paramount. They're in a fight for the assets. And they've heard what the concerns are, that it's going to kill the movie theater experience and kill movie theaters, that people will lose jobs. People who create content will lose jobs because it's one fewer buyer of content. And so they're just trying to assuage these people that won't be the case if Netflix ends up actually being the buyer of Warner Brothers down the road.
Red headline crossing the Bloomberg terminal. Nick Reiner arrested by LAPD. Bail set at $4 million. That's according to Bloomberg News. We'll have some more reporting on that going forward. If you were advising the Warner Brothers Discovery Board, which deal would you recommend from a regulatory standpoint? Which has the least amount of risk?
Oh, I think from an antitrust perspective, it would be Paramount.
Okay.
Yeah, and the reason is because there are overlaps. Both companies have risk. Both companies raise antitrust issues, but I think the issues that are raised by the Paramount bid may be more easily defensible or more easily fixed than the issues that come up with Netflix. And then you also have, what we've seen in the news, that it seems that the owners, the people who are behind Paramount are allies with the administration. And this administration has said that they will be involved in this. And that obviously gives them a leg up with respect to that situation.
Jen, you noted in your research that there's a consumer lawsuit filed against Netflix's bid for Warner Brothers. And it's a proposed class action suit as well. Does that matter? Does that make a difference to what we're seeing right now?
It does. I'll say that these consumer lawsuits seeking to block a deal, sort of aligned alongside any kind of federal or state scrutiny that would occur, they are rarely successful. And this is usually because the Department of Justice or the FTC, whoever the reviewer is at the time, is really considered the expert in antitrust, right? And a judge would prefer to sit back and let that play out and see what happens there than to be the one to decide to block a deal, because that's what the consumers are looking for. Mm-hmm. It's not, money, which is what you usually see in a class action, but to enjoin the closing of the deal. But it adds risk no matter what. It's yet another piece of opposition that you never know could turn into something, along with states, right, that could get involved, that could align with this consumer action or align with the federal agency, the Department of Justice, that could end up going after a deal. So yes, it adds risk. I would say it's a limited risk, but it does.
So if Paramount wins, there's going to be, just from my understanding of the media business, a lot more job losses. Because for every set designer, every writer that Warner Brothers has, Paramount has one as well.
That's right.
And I would argue the synergies, and I've seen research that the synergies, i.e. job cuts, are 2x Paramount versus Netflix. Does that factor into what the regulators look at?
It does. It didn't as much in the past, but this has been a trend in the last 10 years. They will look at the impact on workers. This is what we call in the antitrust world a monopsony issue. Too few buyers of a service. And the Department of Justice is coming off success with that theory of harm. They were able to block Simon & Schuster from acquiring Penguin Random House. And it was all about fewer bidders for top-selling authors. And similar, right? Fewer bidders for content, for writers, for creatives. And so they won that in court recently. And so it is a theory that they could pursue. And it's a viable antitrust theory of harm.
My other question for you, and I guess this should have been the first question I asked you, is Netflix has promised all kinds of things. They're going to continue to release Warner Brothers movies in theaters. They promise no overlap or studio closures. Netflix has a habit, a tendency of going back on their word. They, reverse course on advertising. They reverse course on live sports. So how much can we really trust legally any of what they're saying?
Nothing. You really can't. And honestly, sometimes there are consent orders, settlements entered with the government where these kinds of promises are memorialized in writing. And even in that case, what antitrust practitioners would tell you is that it often fails, right? And the companies would say, look, we're publicly traded companies. We have a fiduciary duty to our shareholders. Economic conditions change, things change. And so that had to change our strategy. So really what they say today doesn't have a lot of meaning. Now, if it were memorialized in a consent order, maybe it has a little bit more clout, because then somebody could go after it in court if they fail to abide by those promises. But even in those cases, this doesn't mean very much.
Do we know which regulatory body, the Department of Justice or the Federal Trade Commission, which one's going to review this deal? Do we care?
It'll very likely be the Department of Justice, because they have experience in this area. That's how these deals are cleared to one or the other.
So do I hire like DOJ counsel just to argue my case, or to the dudes at Simpson Thatcher or whoever? Do they have those people? Do I hire a specialist law firm to do this?
I will tell you, you hire a big antitrust firm where many of the partners probably came from, the Department of Justice or Federal Trade Commission.
That revolving door.
Yes.
Final question to you, Jen. Is the burden all on Netflix to prove that this is not an antitrust breaking deal, or does Warner Brothers Discovery have a role to play here? They've been fairly quiet.
Well, the burden, if they have a deal and it goes before the Department of Justice, the burden is on the Department of Justice, actually, to prove that the deal raises antitrust concerns. I think they have a fairly easy burden because right off with the overlap in streaming assets.
Is the burden on Netflix to defend against that, or is it on Warner Brothers Discovery?
Once there's an agreement signed, it will be up to both of them. Mostly Netflix as the buyer, but the seller also has to be a participant and cooperate in defending the deal.
What does Warner Brothers do in the meantime?
Right now, I think they should just be sitting quietly because it might be there's a battle for the assets, and it might be there are yet higher bids coming, which would be a benefit to them. So it seems to me that I think they've been fairly quiet. Seems to me that's probably a good strategy for them.
Boy, I'm looking at this. The Paramount acquisition. They've got on the lawyers Cleary. They've got Cravath.
Yes.
They got Latham. I
there
mean,
you go.
3 of the monster firms.
Yes.
Now,
they're serious.
Each of those firms, and including the firms representing Netflix, they probably had to say, proceed with this deal. We think it will pass muster. Right?
Well, what they say is we think we can defend this. I don't think any lawyer would say, for sure, we're clearing this deal for you. They would say, look, we think we have defenses, and that if those defenses don't work before the Department of Justice, you have yet another shot before a judge, because it isn't really, at the end of the day, up to the Department of Justice. It's up to a federal judge. You have to go to court, and you can win. Merging companies can win these deals in court.